Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Games Workshop very kindly sent me some of these lovely new Marauders. Let's get some paint on them.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
So thank you very much, Games Workshop, for sending these over early. I think these went out of stock in most areas pretty quickly on launch day. I think they're back in stock now at the time of recording this voiceover, and I had lots of plans to try and get as much of this painted, and we'll cover that a little bit more later on in the video. I've obviously done a review of the Arcane Journal and a bit of a deep dive into the Path of Glory campaign as well. So if you want to check those out, do check those out on the channel. I'll try and remember to put links in now. For those of you who haven't already seen miniatures all over the internet, and there's different unboxings and things already, I'm sure, here's a few shots. I was really impressed with these. I found they were much easier to go together than the Cathay miniatures, which I liked as well, but very few fiddly bits at all. I love brand new Games Workshop miniatures. They look absolutely stunning, but they're also a real pain in the behind to put together quickly. The days of clipping out all your arms and bodies and legs and building up little piles on your work desk, if you used to do it like that, I've gone. Quite often you have to follow the instructions, because if you miss a stage or a certain arm only fits with a certain body, and so on and so on. My plan here was to build a unit of 20 with flails and a unit of 20 with sword and board, and then the horsemen themselves are going to be building with the spears, or the throwing spears, depending on how you want to name them and equip them in your army lists. The instructions are very good, clearly laid out and in colour, and I didn't really have any problems at all. I think them being colour is a huge thing, makes a huge difference. I'm not sure when these boxes are individual whether they'll still be in colour, or they'll be black and white versions, because this is obviously a launch box style version of it, and you tend to find the black and white versions in the smaller boxes regardless of the cost. So even the Sentinel at its price had a black and white set of instructions, which I thought was really problematic with a miniature. It's really hard to build. I'm sure these will still be okay, but them being colour really helps. I appreciate that will be a cost factor, and maybe that cost will be passed on to us as a consumer, but the way miniatures are designed these days, I think we should be getting colour things. On the flip side, we're also very lucky with the old world that we pay less per miniature than we do for Age of Sigmar or 40k or something like that, so be careful what we wish for as well, I suppose. I did the usual, I had to spend a while hunting for certain numbers of pieces, which can be a little bit infuriating at time, but on the whole they weren't too badly spaced out. Yes, there were certain parts from one miniature on different frames, but overall they were quite well grouped. You found, especially with the cavalry, that the miniatures were nearly all in the same segment or same quarter or quadrant. I'm quite impatient when I'm building miniatures. I just want to keep cracking on to the next stage, which is sometimes a problem when you need to wait for a certain part to dry. That can also be a problem when you're building one miniature at a time based on the way the instructions are laid out, but I did find that by super gluing the miniatures to the bases meant that you can kind of have something to hold on to that's a little bit more sturdy when you're gluing the next stage, and they come together quite nicely, as you can see there. Scale wise, I think they're pretty fair. This is one of them next to Friedel. I don't have any of the old Marauders. I don't own any of them, so that's hard to show you. This is one of the Age of Sigmar Dark Oath guys that I was using as my current Marauders, which will now need rebasing. You can see the size there is pretty good as well. They work well together, no issues. This is against one of the Age of Sigmar Chaos Warriors as well. Again, I use those rather than the older ones. Next to an Empire handgunner, he looks bigger and stronger, which is definitely something they're going for, something they're leaning to aesthetically, and that's why they're on the larger bases as well. So overall, I think there's no issues there at all. I think it only took me about 5 hours to build all 40 of the Marauders, and sometimes that it takes me much longer. I sit down to build something in a day as part of my work as a commission painter, and sometimes it can take a whole day just to build a unit. So then again, that should sort of illustrate how easy these go together. I was pretty impressed with them, and these guys with the flails look pretty cool. The flails, some of them are a little bit weak, have broken a couple while painting, something to look out for. I won't spend too much time talking about the Marauder horse because, again, they're very, very similar feedback, really pretty good. The parts tended to be, as I've already mentioned, in the quadrant that you needed. The riders are part of the horse, or at least their legs are. There is a little sort of nodule, which means that you can clip the top half on and then remove it again. You wouldn't want to leave it like that for playing, but you could sub-assemble and paint the top half. I've not done that for the way I'm going to be painting in this video, and there's a reason for that. I'll talk about it a little bit later. But if you wanted to, just so you could get to certain parts, you could paint the two halves, or the legs on the rider's legs rather on the horse, and then the top half of the rider separately, and then you have to super glue them together afterwards. Totally up to you, whatever you prefer. But again, nothing remarkable here other than that they weren't too painful to build, actually, compared to some of the more recent miniatures. See, the whole horse here with all that detail is pretty much just two halves, which is pretty good. And here are the 10, and again, they built up pretty quickly, only parts when I'm a little bit impatient. I'm trying to wait for an elbow to dry so I can glue the next part on or something like that, but they're pretty good. And if you have enough space on your desk, you could have multiple on a go, but you would be flicking backwards and forwards through the pages a little bit. Lots of variation as well, loads of extra heads in both kits, loads of ways to play around with it. I mostly built it per instructions, but having built those now, you can see where all the little changes and things that you can make as well. So they can look pretty unique if you want them to. Now here they are all primed, and you may have already caught a speed painting Warriors of Chaos army video that I did, and these are going to be joining that. And you can see here I'm using a couple of browns, and I'm going to be trying to paint in a speed painty kind of way, but still make the army look pretty eye-catching. So it's not a quick just a white prime and then slap on some contrast paint, but I want to do lots of work with underpainting as I did in that previous video. The idea is that you can batch paint, do lots of work for some of the main colors in bulk, do a minimal amount of highlighting them using lots of little tricks with your underpainting, and then there'll be something really nice. So I'm zenithaling those browns onto the miniature. As you can see here, that's the first layer down, and then I'm moving on to some creams and beiges for some dry brushing, and these are going over the top. So this is your slap top thing that you hear about an awful lot, but usually you would do a zenithal with a grey or a white over black, and then I like to do a little dry brush on top. But what I've done here is go the opposite way around and actually start with some earthy browns, because I want these miniatures to look like they're wearing lots of earthy colours. They're not going to have, in my mind anyway, lots of bright expensive fabrics unless they've stolen them, and they're probably not spending much time washing their clothes in between campaigns. They're going to be pretty grim and dirty. So what I'm doing here with all this dry brushing is really picking up on that detail. Now I'm using the new style dry brushes that you get. These are rounded ones. I'm using a dry palette to take off most of the paint, lots of circular motions, and I'm taking my time to make sure that less is more, and I'm slowly building up that dry brushing. I don't want streaks all over the miniatures. That will completely spoil the effect I want to achieve here. Do you want a really, really subtle gradient from a dark brown, almost black in places, up to white at the very, very tips of some of the edges, and you get this really nice, rather than grayscale looking, we'll call it brown scale, if that makes any sense. And this is after that first level of dry brushing. And I've been pretty vague with the colours here, and there's a reason for it, because I think you can see what's on the screen as I hold up the paints, and you can always pause it and write them down. And I will also provide a full paint list on my Patreon for free. You have to be a free member to view it. But if you don't want to sign up for that, as I say, just pause the screen as I go through and make a note down of the paint. But I will show you everything on screen that I'm using, so I'm not hiding anything from you there. But the reason I don't want to mention specific paint names all the time is because you can all work to your own favourite paint ranges and just pick an appropriate colour that matches what I'm showing on the screen. And this video will be super, super long if I do what I normally do and go into detail with every single paint. As you can see here, I'm waving a white paint in front of the camera. That's actually a grey white. And I'm doing another dry brush on top, much gentler this time, just focusing more on the top of the miniature, just to really accentuate the top where the light would hit. Again, super subtle here. I don't want that paint to be at all wet. I don't want it streaking anywhere. I just want to really add to that overall sort of modulated effect that I've got through the airbrushing and the dry brushing. If you don't have an airbrush, you could rattle can your miniatures in a nice mid-grey and then still do all these dry brushing, and the rest of the video you can follow completely. Here's some examples of what it looks like at that stage, and I'll be focusing on 2 or 3 miniatures for most of the video now rather than working on them all on camera. Here is a massive range of contrast and some Army Painter speed paints here. The theme is it's the speed paint contrast style of paint, and there are other brands that work as well. I've mostly got lots of browns here, a few sort of ochre yellows and things as well, and again work with what you have, and that paint list, as I said, will be on the Patreon if you want to see exactly what I used. So I'm starting here with a reddish fleshish brown and a bone colour. Now the Army Painter bone colour you can see here, it's got a browner tone to it than the Skeleton Horde contrast paint, which I'll be using in another part of the miniature. So the deliberate choices here for different stages, this gives you a much more of a dirty looking fur, which is what I'm going here. And now I'm applying that sort of reddish skin colour leather, because a lot of their cloaks are clearly meant to be made out of hide or skin or something like that. I'm being really even with my coats here. I don't want too much pulling, just enough pulling in the recesses to give you the shadows. But all that work that I've done with the airbrush, with the Zenithal, and all that dry brushing should really boost those edges. So when you apply neat layers of contrast or Army Painter speed paint or so on, you'll get really nice finishes. So I'm mixing a bit of a separate flesh colour here with that darker reddish brown for the banner. I wanted to give it a slightly different tonal choices and really make that look like it might be made out of skin. So I'm just wet blending them on the miniature, as you see here. So I've got both of those paints out in my palette, and I'm just switching between the two, allowing the paints to mix together while they're still wet, and you end up with this really nice effect. I'm really working hard to make sure that the flatter areas don't have any pooling on throughout this. You can see here I'm using an ochreish green here just to pick out certain areas on the trousers, and there's a little wraps here on the bottom of the horse's legs. I think those wraps would be quite dirty, so that greenish ochre's perfect for it. Same on some of the Marauders boots here as well. This is more of a reddish brown. You can see they're ready fur from speed paint, and I'm using that again in just an alternative colour for the trousers on this miniature. And the idea is you have a big mix of different browns. Here we go, there's another one, and apply them in different places. And that's partly why I'm not saying use this paint here, use this paint there, because I think you'll get the best effect from your Marauders if you have a large palette of desaturated browns and greens maybe, and ochres, maybe even blues, as long as they're not too bright. Blue was historically, I know this isn't real world, historically a very expensive dye, so you use that in a limited palette as well. The idea is just be free to go around and place lots of different browns in different areas, keeping the coats nice and neat so that your underpainting is showing through. Now here I've chosen one of my favourites, which is Contrast Cygor Brown. It's a much darker, richer colour, and it's very different to some of the others. They're not thinned as much, and this is deliberate. I'm going to avoid doing a lot of highlight, a lot of edge highlighting on this miniature or these miniatures, because I'm using that underpainting method and all that dry brushing, and then the nice thin even coats of the contrast or speed paint. Certain areas I want to stand out a little bit bolder and break up those different areas, and I will do a limited amount of normal highlighting. And I thought for their boots and belts and little straps and things, this is the perfect colour for that. So I will come back and highlight this in a more regular way using regular paints. Most of those other browns you've seen I won't, I'll leave it as it is. Here we have a normal wood brown, so wildwood in this case, and a light green. I'm adding a little bit of medium, you can add water as well, depending on what your water's like in your area, to the wood colour, just so it flows a little bit more. And this is the recipe for all of the wood on all of the miniatures, and I'm wet blending them together, much like you saw on the banner earlier. And what you get really is mostly dominated by brown, but little patches of green that runs into all the wood grain on the detail on those miniatures, which gives you this really nice effect. And by keeping them fairly thin, you've got that highlight showing through already in those lighter areas where you've boosted that with all the dry brushing, and hopefully that's showing up on the video. I'm having to speed it all up because there's just so much in this video and no one wants to watch an hour-long painting tutorial, but I think it's a really nice simple effect you can do, really easy. I've done it in lots of videos before. It's definitely give it a go if you haven't tried it already. As you can see, it works perfectly on the shield here as well, just applying in patches. You get that nice variation in tone, which you obviously get with real wood. Now this is Goddess Glow, which is probably a reddish skin tone really, because I've painted the horse the way I have using the airbrush for all those zenithals and that light dry brushing over the top, which is really subtle. I can add a very thin layer of this and you get a really nice colour horse, a nice reddish fur on your horse, and it's a little bit weird to start with, but once it dries you can really see the effect. And remember, my goal here is to not to have to go back and do normal brush highlighting unless I really have to, because I've got a lot to paint and it fits into that remit of a speed painted Warriors of Chaos army, but I still want them to look good. And when this dries, hopefully you'll start to see the effect, so I think it's quite pleasing. This was another alternative that I used, slightly darker version, but now I'm using some black just to pick out all the fur again for your chaos horses. I don't want to make them all black, but black fur to go with the reddish mane fur, so the black manes and the hair at the horse's feet, which will have a particular name, I'm sure someone will know and put in the comments, but it just works really well. You want to make sure your black is either thin enough or you thin it enough, depending on which brown you have, to go into the recesses but come away from those top edges to give you that natural highlight. You can always dry brush it a little bit if you need to, but if you get it right in the first place, you get that mix right, then you need to do even less later on. And of course I'm using a little bit for a beard as well. Now I like yellow and orange beards on my Northmen as well as black, and that's the three colours I'm sticking with. So one fairly vibrant orange and one fairly vibrant yellow, and the reason for that is obvious because I've done all this underpainting. I've got the shadow there already and I want to limit the amount of highlighting that I have to do on top. I'll say that for the characters. So this is Skeleton Horde, so the Games Workshop, the Citadel version of a bone colour. I'm using this for all of the wraps around the axe handles, all of the ropes and things as well. I use this a lot. It's one of my favourite colours, really subtle. Of course, all the skulls, there's lots of skulls on this miniature as well, lots of bone pieces hanging down. This is just a really nice sort of layer over. You glaze over the top of what you've already got as a sort of a slightly highlighted brownish colour, and it just glazes over the top and gives you a really nice effect as it is. Now for the skin, I'm going pure traditional. That's because your eye is drawn to faces and things, and it really tidies up the miniature where you're cutting corners all over the place with all these brown layered clothing and the fur and things. Here, by doing a nice, neat, clean, standard layering process, I've got three colours here: standard, base, mid-tone and highlight. Those are two thin coats paints. They convert very well to Citadel as well, so if you're a Citadel user, you'll be able to use your favourite sort of triad, however you like to call it. If you're using other brands as well, you'll be able to find them, but you want that base tone, mid and highlight, and I just work up from dark. That's my preferred way. I like to do the eyes after I've got the base layer down, because that way if your one eye's a bit big or you spill a bit of white onto the cheek and stuff, you can just cut back in with that base colour before you go and spend all the time making your highlights perfect and have to redo them. But I'm layering up those skin colours, and a nice, clean, regularly painted, highlighted skin just makes the miniature stand out and look much nicer, and it draws your eye and takes you away from some of the corner cutting. This is boar hide from Two Thin Coats, but again, go and find your own version. It's a nice reddish mid-brown, which I'm using to highlight the Cygor brown contrast paint. The one that I said is a little bit darker and I want it to be a bit more punchy, and is one of the three areas that I'm highlighting properly on the miniature. So the first was the skin you saw, the three layers. This is going back and highlighting those more punchy browns, so the darkest leather, the boots, the belts and the little leather ties and things, so it just breaks up all those slightly more washier browns. Now beware, I've got the white back out for some more dry brushing. This is an off-white, and you need to be super careful here because you could mess up the paint jobs that you've been doing and lose all of the effects. But you get this right, then you really boost the effect and take away any need for you to do any highlighting. So I've got the tiniest amount of paint on a smaller brush, and first of all I'm focusing just over the areas where the skeleton horde has gone. So the skulls, the bits of rope, sometimes just on the edges of some of the fur, just giving it the slightest push, not much at all, just a little tickle here and there. And I know they're not the best technical terms, but what you really want to avoid is wet paint going on this miniature. So you're just giving it such a subtle little brush over that you can only just see that you've put the paint on there, but it's surprising what sort of difference it makes. But what I tend to do afterwards now is start to move on to the edges of some of the brown, and that's deliberate. I just want the faintest tickles to edge highlight, so that now I can come back with skeleton horde and just glaze back over, so it just softens down any of those bits that look a little bit white that you've got on the edges of some of those darker browns, and it gives you basically a cheating edge highlight. You can get it wrong, and it's worth playing around with it first. You need to have really good dry brushing control to make sure you don't get any flat streaky marks, because otherwise it will just look like you've gone back and dry brushed white over browns, which is never really a good look. But you get it right, and you can go back and glaze like this afterwards, just soften it all back down, and suddenly you've done no edge highlighting and the miniature looks like it's got proper highlighting all over the place. Some of you may have noticed that the cloaks and the banner looks a little bit shiny. One of those skin colours just had a little bit of a shining. I don't know if it's because I didn't shake the bottle, but you get that with paint sometimes. So I'm just applying a little bit of matte varnish there just to dull it back down, and it'll also protect it from the transfers of the decals I'm going to put on a little bit later. We move on to the metals now, and I like to start with a really dark brownish metallic, like a real sort of dull bronze where possible, and then build up to a gunmetal style midtone and then a light silver afterwards. And I just think it gives the metal loads of tonal quality, and if you leave a little bit of brown in the recesses it shades as well. And I built my own colours there. Again, pause the screen, rewind, whatever it is, or go and check the Patreon out for those exact paints, but or pick your own from those examples. But essentially what I'm doing is covering everything that's going to be metallic in this brown colour first, this bronze colour, and that will give a really nice base for everything else. And no doubt you'll have guessed this is the other area of these miniatures that I'm painting properly, in inverted commas, where I'm actually going to paint with layering and highlighting as I would on a standard miniature where I'm not working with an underpainting and just contrast paints over the top. Now, very often I use contrast paints as my base layers anyway, but if you watch a lot of my videos, you'll know that I will go on and highlight pretty much normally after that and just find it's a really nice base. Here you'll have seen I have skipped highlighting most of the body of the miniature. All those different browns and ochres and things I have left with the contrast paints or the army painter paints and that little dry brush and then the glaze back over the top. But like I did with the skin areas and that one area of brown, focusing on little parts like that, painting them properly, just really, I say properly, that's a terrible word to use really, but painting them in this way really just makes the miniatures pop, and your eyes won't focus on, oh, is that all just a contrast painted miniature? You'll see the areas that are finished, the areas that always draw the eye, like the metallics in the face, etc. And then that big mass of brown fabric can just be its big mass of brown fabric. And while I've been rabbiting on with that, you've seen that I've worked my way through those three colours. As I get to the top silver here, just a tiny little dry brush on some of the larger areas. But now it's time for the transfers or the decals or decals or whatever you want to call them for whatever part of the world you're in. I'll try to remember to pop a link in for a video on how to apply decals if you're really interested. It's about 5 minutes long and it goes into a little bit of detail around the processes and why not. But I'm using Microset and Microsol, which are fantastic, not too expensive, and will last you forever if you buy a pot of each. Moving on to the basing, some of it's slightly different that would have been in that big video just because I'm using different kit now, but I've got to rebase some stuff anyway, as we already know. But I'm using some stuff from AK called Dark Earth. This is European mud from Vallejo, but all of the stuff will be listed, as I've said, on my Patreon. I'm using some oil washes as well. This is grease. I'm using that on the base, but I will also be using it, as you can see, on the miniature as well, and I use it to shade all of the metallics. So rather than using a Citadel wash or Army Painter wash or something, I prefer to use oil paints. It evaporates, it sits in the recesses nicer, It doesn't pool, and you can wipe it away as well, anything that sort of surface dry on the tops as well. So really, really good for using oil paints on stuff like this. Using a little bit of dry pigment just in patches on the base, which I blow the excess off, and don't bother sealing because it's in all that dry texture detail. Just gluing some tufts on as well from my favourite maker of tufts in the UK, Warpaint Figures, and these are 2mm winter ones. A little bit of snow effect as well. I've got two kinds here, both from AK. The standard snow, and then the sprinkles, which looks like sort of sparkly snow. The standard stuff I'm applying mostly to where the tufts are first, so you've got that thawing snow effect, when it sort of seems to be still in the grass areas, but has thawed or has got wet in all the areas that people are walking, specifically on mud as well. Then the sprinkles directly on top of them when it's dried a little bit, and it just gives you that kind of slightly wet, sparkly look. And then a little bit of blood for the blood god. Thinned it always works better if you add a little bit of water, and of course there's lots of gruesome bits on these miniatures, and like to add a little bit to a flail here and there. You can go a little bit heavier than you would on some. You expect to see blood on some chaotic miniatures, a little bit running through the snow as well, always looks cool. A little bit on the banner, especially with the Cult of the Serpent that I've chosen here, the old Slaanesh stuff. Lots of sort of skin on display, and you can have it a little bit gruesome if you want to. Same if you go for the corn style ones as well. A little splatter on the sharp edges of the shield. Don't get too carried away, but it does add stuff that draws the eye again away from some of the more basic painting that are on these miniatures, and you end up with something that's quite sort of eye-catching when there's lots of corners being cut, which is exactly what I'm going for. And I think that's the essence of doing this speed, right? And they are speed in inverted commas. There's still a lot of stages, but speed painting kind of methods. If I was to edge highlight and layer up every single different part of clothing on these Marauders, there's so much detail, it would just take me forever. And I know a lot of people will paint that way, but this is very much an army painting effect here. Loads of dry brushing, loads of airbrushing, and loads of glazed layers with the contrast paints or contrast style paints if you're using Army Painter Speed Paint, or you're using the Vallejo Express Colour, and so on and so on. If you get them the right viscosity and you pick the right colours, your underpainting shows through just right, so it looks like you've got all of your edge highlights showing. And then you can do little tricks like I did with that tiniest little bit of dry brushing back over the painted areas that I then glaze back with another light colour like the Skeleton Horde, and it looks like I've done some edge highlighting on some of the fronts of those leather areas, and I've done nothing of the sort. Then you can really tie that in by painting the skin properly, doing that sort of 3-stage layering highlighting to make it pop and stand out and not look too wishy-washy. Same with the metallics, make sure that they're punchy and strong even while looking old. And I think you can have a really striking looking army. A lot of it you've done lots of quick things, lots of time-saving stuff, and I think it looks pretty cool. So I'm really interested to know what you think of that. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I had loads of fun doing these. Thank you very much again to Games Workshop for sending those miniatures. And I hope you enjoyed the process I went through, trying to paint these relatively quickly, but still have a nice effect, much akin to that original army painting video that I did already, as I've mentioned no doubt plenty of times in the video. If you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel. Those things genuinely really help the channel and help the channel grow and be seen by other people, and I really appreciate it. If you'd like to support me even further, please also check out my Patreon. Lots of wonderful patrons over there who already support me. Thank you so much to all of you. It really is the very best way of supporting me and the channel. There's multiple different tiers at different price levels, of which you get a different amount back depending on what tier you go for. So please do go and check that out. Check out all the other links as well in the video description. There's a few affiliate links as well, including the Warhammer merch store, which is great this time of year leading up to Christmas. If you're looking for gifts and things, it's just a really nice way of giving me a little bit of a kickback if you were going to buy something from there anyway. And of course, check out the channel sponsor, Counterattack Bases. They are a fantastic UK based company for gaming aids and tools and custom dice as well. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.